Okay, so we're recording. Good evening, or whatever time of day it is where you are, and welcome to our March webinar. My name is Vladimir Miletic, as you can see here on the left, and today we will be talking about skin picking and mindfulness of the body, and specifically, what is it that you can get from cultivating mindfulness of the body in terms of how it can help you get rid of skin picking, how it can help you understand picking more. And I will try to give you examples from my clients and clients who have completed the program, hopefully to illustrate in very plastic terms what is it that I'm trying to convey. Uh, so this turned out to be, even though I teach mindfulness among other things that I do, this turned out to be quite a stubborn topic because it's very difficult to put into words since what we're doing is beyond words by definition. So I thought that in the end of the webinar, we can actually do a short mindfulness exercise of about 5 or 10 minutes. So when we get to that in the end, if you like, you can participate. If not, just do something else until we move on to the Q&A. But I feel like it's much better if we actually demonstrate what I'm talking about rather than just to intellectualize about it. Because mindfulness at the end of the day is something that we should be doing, not thinking about. So here are some of the topics that we will be talking about. So as always, I like to start off by defining the terms that I will be using so that we all know what is it that I'm talking about. And we will go kind of from the most general term to the most specific ones. So first, I will tell you what is awareness. And if we're talking about mindfulness of the body, we're talking about awareness of bodily sensations. So first we have to define awareness. Then we will define mindfulness as a kind of technology to cultivate awareness. And then we will specifically talk about mindfulness of the body. We will talk about clinging versus letting go. We will talk about mindfulness of the body as a way to learn about picking and also as a coping mechanism in itself. Then I will explain how to do body scans, and so that we don't leave it only at a vague instructional level. When you receive the links to the recordings of the webinar, I will also make sure to include 2 guided meditations. So if you want to start practicing body scans, you will have all the resources that you need in your email, so you can start on your own. And then, as always, we will go to the Q&A. You can already start asking any questions that you have if there's something specific that you want to ask. And as I go through the presentation, as always, you just write your questions in the Q&A, and I will go through all of them in the order in which you send them once we get to the Q&A part. Okay, so let's start by defining the basic terms. It's very difficult to define awareness, but at the same time, it's also pretty much a fundamental thing, not just for mindfulness practice, but really for anything. And the definition that I like is kind of vague, and that's the first sentence here. It says, awareness is the state of being conscious of something. So essentially, it's you knowing that something is out there. It's just knowing what's happening. It's not the most it's precise, but it's kind of abstract. And that's because awareness is an abstract thing. And let's say this is the most minimalist approach that I could possibly find to awareness. Because if you try to read about the concept of awareness and consciousness, you'll find a lot of different ideas floating around. So scientists will be talking about one thing, philosophers will be talking about 10 different things, and then you have a lot of spiritual and religious ideas attached to this as well. And then whenever I start talking about awareness, people tend to basically interpret that through whatever lens they like. So in order to avoid confusion, I use this term in a very simple, naked way, is just knowing what's happening. There are 2 key points to remember here. One is that awareness is always an awareness of something. So there's always an object of awareness, like you have to have something to be aware of. And then the second thing is that awareness is not something that you practice and then achieve and then have forever. It's always a work in progress. The reason for this is remember the first thing that's important to remember. There's always an object of awareness, which means that objects change because the world always changes. And because we are just a part of the world, we also change. So awareness is basically a process that keeps unfolding all the time. And because it's something that keeps unfolding and changing and fluctuating, it's also a very fragile thing. Uh, we'll consider now some aspects of skin picking and how awareness figures into that. And I think that's a very good way to kind of see how unstable and fragile it is. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because every time when we approach a topic that has to do with mindfulness in one way or another, people seem to, maybe I'm never clear enough, or people misunderstand me because it suits them to understand me in a certain way. But it's not something that you do once or even practice for, I don't know, 8 weeks if you're taking MBSR or one of those structured courses, and then you're done with it. So it's something that you have to kind of cultivate all the time. And if you use mindfulness as one of the ways to cope with skin picking, it's not something that you can do one day when you feel like I need some mindfulness today. Like it's something to practice every day. So this is why I'm emphasizing how fragile it is. It's like a plant. If you don't water it, it will wither away at some point. So let's consider how awareness kind of relates to skin picking. So what we know from experience, right, that there's roughly two types of picking. One is focused, which is when you're kind of aware of what you're doing, so you know that you're picking. And then the other kind of picking, which is notoriously really rather difficult to deal with, is the automatic picking, where you're not actually aware of it. So you're doing something quite troubling and something that damages your skin, and it happens entirely outside of your awareness. So talking about fragility of awareness and how it's easily disrupted, that we can do so many things to our bodies and can be completely unaware of that happening. And then there are those instances of picking that are kind of neither here nor there, where on the periphery somewhere, you do understand what's happening, but it's not the focus of your awareness. So you kind of keep on doing it in the background. So it's more of a spectrum. It's not a black and white thing. Either you're aware of something or you're not. There are kind of degrees to which you can be aware of something. Think about sort of what precedes picking. So just immediately before you start picking, what's the last thing that happens? Now, it's very difficult to pinpoint, right? But there has to be something that happens which then precipitates your hand moving upwards, for example. And this is not something that we're usually aware of. And when we start either doing therapy or mindfulness or both, this is one of those things where we have to kind of infuse more awareness so that we can understand how the whole process of picking works. What does it feel like to pick, for example? People often talk about feeling relief or some sort of release after the fact, but what is the process itself like? How does your skin feel while you pick? This is, for example, one thing that we usually are kind of decide not to be aware of at the time, because people will describe picking as something that can be quite pleasurable, but at the same time, our your skin is hurt, so your skin is in pain. But that's something that our mind tends to kind of move to the side. So it's something that we choose not to be aware of, so that we can perpetuate picking in this instance. So what comes first? Feeling the urge to pick or seeing an imperfection? So there are no correct, there's no true or false answers here. This is just to reflect on and think about and see what it's like in your experience and how much of it are you aware of. So one of the reason why we talk about awareness as being important in psychological change is that without it, we can't really quite understand the processes that take place within us. They're buried somewhere else, in some sort of psychological basement, and they seem kind of automated or like a reflex, or sometimes they just seem bizarre and random. But that's because we're aware of only one part of the process and everything else is kind of buried somewhere else. And when we cultivate mindfulness of the body, that actually helps us excavate some elements of what we cannot express in words so easily. So what's unconscious will sometimes kind of emerge through the body. And this is one of the reasons why it's particularly useful to cultivate different forms of body awareness when we want to deal with picking, because they help us dig out all these things that we've chosen not to be aware of. So in order to kind of enhance and expand and cultivate our awareness, we do that through practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness, I like this definition. I'm sure you've heard it a million times. So it's the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Uh, Essentially, it's an interplay between open awareness, meaning whatever comes up, and concentration. And then we kind of go back and forth between these two things when we practice mindfulness. And this helps us gain a degree of control uh, over what comes into our field of awareness and what we do with it. When I say concentration, I mean whatever you choose to be the object of your focus. So, for example, your body, as that would be our topic today, or even picking, if we're talking about an intense episode of picking. And then open awareness would be the rest of your field. I'm trying to give you an example. Let's say you're talking to someone, but you hear noise on the side. Let's say you're listening to me right now, but you can hear, I don't know, there's some sort of noises around you, or you can feel the chair you're sitting on, or people talking, or cars passing by. So I would be hopefully the object of your focus. And then the rest would be kind of your field of awareness. And then when we practice mindfulness, the same when we talk or listen or read, we kind of balance out the two. You cannot shut off the peripheral awareness, because then you will not even notice what distractions are there. And then you will be distracted without knowing you're getting distracted. And you also cannot give it too much attention or importance, because then whatever the object of your concentration is, it will not be as prominent and you won't be able to understand it or be with it. So we kind of have to balance the two. And essentially, that's what mindfulness meditation is all about. And that's the principle that we apply to our bodies as well when we cultivate mindfulness of the body. I will show you practically how it's done if it sounds too abstract. So why mindfulness? At this point, there are thousands and thousands of studies that show all these different kind of benefits to practicing mindfulness. I've listed some of them here, and I'm not going to go over them because I'm sure that you know some of them already. I will narrow down the list when I talk a little bit about mindfulness of the body, so that you can see specifically what this practice can help you with. But all these benefits that mindfulness offers are also something that we can use when we talk about dealing with skin picking. Just the first one here is a good example: decreasing your reactivity to stress. Stress is a major trigger, and even if stress itself is not a trigger, it kind of creates the atmosphere where anything can trigger you. So decreasing your stress levels obviously will decrease picking. So that's just one example, and you can kind of find a connection to picking in each of these. So let's see specifically what is it that we can get when it comes to skin picking. One I already mentioned, which is that stress reduction lowers the threshold for triggers. Mindfulness helps us cultivate a proactive rather than a reactive approach to our experience. What this basically means is that whatever you feel, whatever sensations, whatever emotion may arise, you will not be swayed by it. So you will not instinctively react. If you remember one of our previous webinars, we talked about avoidant behaviors and how we often avoid difficult emotions, and then that causes all kinds of problems, skin picking included. That means that by practicing mindfulness, when very intense emotions arise, your instinct will not be to immediately run away. You will be able to observe the emotion, kind of watch it, describe it, and then decide what the best course of action is. Mindfulness does this by kind of strengthening our, not just the functioning of our prefrontal cortex, but also its structure. So physically, it can alter it after prolonged and sustained practice. So it's been shown in numerous studies at this point that mindfulness can do that. So this helps you, for example, use different techniques like, I don't know, anything from habit reversal training more effectively. And sometimes it allows you to just be with your experience and kind of observe the urge, but not feel the need to react to it. We cannot control what we feel or what we think, but mindfulness can kind of help us tweak our response to what's happening. Mindfulness helps us develop proprioception. It's something that we already have, obviously, but it kind of boosts this ability, meaning that you develop a much better awareness of what's happening in your body, where, how, and how it changes. This may not sound important, but as hopefully you will see in my examples in the webinar, it's vital. It's, to me, possibly the most important thing you can get from practicing mindfulness. Because you're becoming more aware of what's happening, it will decrease automatic picking. You will notice it instantly. So it will, even if you do pick, it will be more focused. Or if you notice your hands moving up, for example, you will be able to stop yourself sooner. So there's less automatic picking. And it helps us understand the psychology behind picking, because it increases our capacity to kind of open up to our experience and just really look at it. It makes us accept more. It makes us see clearly. So you can learn what is it that basically picking does for you. What is its psychological purpose? What job it has to do? So how do we practice this mysterious mindfulness of the body? So it's very simple. I guess if you kind of put together what I already said in the first 2 or 3 slides, it's very simple. It's just cultivating awareness of your body sensations. It's nothing more, nothing less. That's all it is. What this means is that when you think about your body or practice body scans, you're not imagining anything. So you're not going to create an ideal image of what your body should be like. You're not going to, imagine your worst nightmares of what your body is really like. You're most certainly not going to make assumptions about what your body should be feeling like. So none of these things will happen in mindfulness. Naturally, our minds will do that, but every time that happens, we kind of let go and go back to the body. What we're doing is really just listening to what is actually happening in the moment in certain parts of our body. Again, because mindfulness is balancing between focus and awareness, you're not going to kind of just entirely immerse yourself in one body part. You will put that body part in front, but be aware of everything else that's happening. Because by changing what's the focus and what's the background, we also gain a little bit more control over how we react to certain experiences. It's like turning the volume up and down, if you will. And when you learn this ability by practicing mindfulness, it's something that can be quite useful in terms of kind of turning down the volume to an urge and then turning up the volume on something else. You can try it right now. Take whatever part of your body and just see what's happening there. Focus on your chest, for example. That's something that's frequently very reactive. So don't imagine, and just try. You can close your eyes if you like. Just try to see what's happening in there. What's your breathing like? Heart rate? It can be quite a difficult exercise to do. We will do a more thorough one later on. This is just to kind of give you a taste of it. So let me explain one more thing that I think is really important to know. So when you practice mindfulness, so not just mindfulness of the body, but any kind of mindfulness really, you will notice that you will be distracted very frequently by thoughts. They will be about all kinds of things. Most frequently, they will be about these kind of mundane, irrelevant things or some kinds of judgments that your brain likes to spin over and over again. And this is usually the first part of our experience that we notice, because it's almost like, I guess culturally, in a sense, we're conditioned to notice thoughts more than anything else, because thoughts are very clear and very easy to understand. If you have a thought, I need to water my plants. That's a thought that's very easy. There's no mystery there. There's nothing that's difficult to understand. So it's very obvious what it means. And so these are the things that we most frequently first start noticing. It's that which we can understand very easily. And usually that which we can explain with words in such simple terms and what we can understand so easily, we can also solve ourselves. So that's typically not something that you will discuss in therapy. And that's typically not something that will pose a problem. Problems are usually in those areas that we cannot quite easily express with words. So those nonverbal aspects of our experience. Um, I've put a picture of basically an iceberg here, or two icebergs, I don't know how many. And I suppose you all know, Freud's kind of metaphor of our mind is an iceberg, where these areas that are above the water, they're what's, I guess, our conscious mind, and then everything else would be unconscious. That's perhaps slightly a simplification even of Freud's own theory, but I think it's a very useful way to illustrate how we work. A huge part of our psychological processes are not verbal. Some of them can be verbalized if we observe them carefully, put an effort in, and try to really find the right words. But more often than not, it's almost impossible to put these things precisely into words because they just don't exist at the level of language. They kind of operate with different symbols in a different language. So what happens when you start practicing mindfulness is that you start observing these levels, kind of these levels underwater. And when you start observing them, your natural response will be to try to put them into words and define them precisely. And this happens even outside of mindfulness. Like I will ask people, I don't know, what does it feel like to be anxious? And what they will try to do is just define it very precisely. And then when they fail, they will usually end up being frustrated. And the truth is, when I ask this question, I never expect a precise answer. What I expect is, is a description of an impression, more or less. So let's do just a very brief kind of thought experiment. Imagine that obviously this iceberg here is your mind, but then somehow miraculously, imagine you can actually stand on top of your mind. So you're standing on the edge of the iceberg, like right here. And so you're sitting there and you're practicing mindfulness because you're kind of inside your own mind here. You basically are looking around. That would be mindfulness, right? So you're looking at different parts of the iceberg. Everything that's above the water, those are your thoughts, your conscious mind. So you can come close, you can touch them, you can smell, you can, I don't know, taste the iceberg if you like. So you can kind of investigate it very closely because it's solid, it's frozen, it's there to observe and kind of spin around, exactly like our thoughts. You can take any thought that you have and then examine it however you like. But then you will approach the edge of the iceberg and then you will look down. And then you will see that there are these areas where the water is very dark and you don't see anything. And then there are these kind of more shallow areas. And even there you have different colors. There's like this greenish blue color. Then there's the white on the edges, which kind of illustrates the different depth. And because the water is always sort of moving and things are submerged, you don't actually see clearly what's happening beneath. Like you're just seeing some kind of strange shapes and shadows. And it's very difficult to tell what's big and what's small and what's important and what's not important. That's exactly how mindfulness operates. And this is exactly how we treat our emotions as well. So one of the things that avoiding our emotions and distracting ourselves and running away does is that whenever we look at them briefly, they always seem that way, muddy, unclear, vague, and usually scary. I don't know if you ever, I remember when I was little and I really liked swimming and I always did. And so I would kind of swim very deep when I go, to the beach. And then usually like you can, when you swim and you look down, you can see like, I don't know, there's like white sand. So it's all very light. And then there will be like an area with bigger rocks or I don't know, some kind of seaweed or something. And then suddenly from your perspective, when you swim, it will seem very dark and very dangerous. And if you're a kid like I was in this instance, you will think, what kind of a freakish monster is this? Because it looks very scary. It looks black and it looks dark. And this is how we tend to treat our emotions very frequently. We notice that something very big and undefined is happening inside, and then we freak out and we want to escape. And when you start practicing mindfulness, what you're doing is you're kind of approaching the edge of the iceberg and you're looking down and you're trying to see the shapes. And because you're practicing mindfulness, you know that the shapes you see are unclear. So you try not to panic. You just observe, you let them go up and down, and you kind of, you slowly start to, as you look at them, change. And and become bigger or smaller or go deeper or go to the surface, you will sort of slowly start to create an image in your mind, which is a more precise image of what's really down there. Instead, when you just look down, see a shadow and say, oh my God, this is scary, I'm leaving. So mindfulness helps us befriend these nonverbal aspects of our experience. And that also means the urge to pick. And I will explain a little bit more sort of what we can do with the urge specifically. But overall, mindfulness gives us a safe space to observe our less verbal aspects of our experience. One more thing that I think is quite important to know. So the idea that our mind affects our body is, I think, at this point, kind of a mainstream thing. We all know that when we have scary thoughts, we obviously get scared. Sometimes you will notice how your mind is spinning around all these ideas, usually three thoughts that kind of repeat themselves very quickly. And then as a result of observing or having these thoughts, we become very anxious. And then, for example, I don't know, let's say you have an exam tomorrow, and then your mind starts spinning these thoughts like you'll fail, you'll fail, you'll fail. And then at one point you start feeling anxiety. Your heart will start racing, your breathing will change, your palms might start sweating, or whatever else happens to you specifically when you feel anxious. So our mind often makes us feel a certain way. But it also works in reverse. And this is, I think, something that we can make good use of when it comes to intense emotional states. There's one example that maybe you've heard of. So that would be progressive muscle relaxation. That's a technique where you kind of tighten your muscles and then relax them in a specific order. And what happens as a result is that this practice will make you less anxious. It will make you less tense, and then ultimately less anxious as well. The way that it works is not that it kind of argues with your mind. It's not that it changes anything fundamental in the way that your thought patterns operate. What it does is that it relaxes your body. When you tighten your muscles and then relax them, your brain gets a signal which says, okay, so the body is not tight anymore. Maybe there's no danger here. And then your mind also relaxes. So the way that your mind can affect your body can also affect your mind. So there's like a circular relationship there. And what that basically means is that in order to kind of change or stop an intense emotion, you can work on both levels. For some people, one level will be better than the other, but you can kind of try both sets of techniques, let's say, and then you can see what works best for you. Today, we're obviously exploring how the mind will affect the body. You can also see this if you experiment with how you sit. You can change your posture and then see how that makes you feel. You will notice that for example, if you're slouching for a very long time, that can actually affect the way you think about yourself. And then if you straighten up, you might actually feel differently. You can try and experiment with this sometimes. It's quite interesting how something so ordinary and something that we don't really give much thought to can actually change the way we think. So I'm going to give you an example of a client who came to therapy. This is actually a client from SkinPick. This is how she described her picking in the beginning of the treatment. And then she wanted to try practicing mindfulness and she liked it. And so we used that as a kind of main thing in our work together. So this was the beginning of the treatment. So she says, I catch myself picking, but there's nothing in particular that I feel. I know I'm stressed, but why do I start picking at any given time seems random if I'm being honest. I mostly just catch myself picking. So as you can see, there's not a lot of awareness here. Like she knows she's stressed, but that's not being in touch with the stress you feel. That's just the kind of general information that she knows that she works too much and doesn't relax enough. So that's something that she can generalize and kind of extrapolate from her previous experiences. But if you see, there's really not much of a description of how the process actually looks like. What we know is that she's stressed and then she just picks randomly, right? And our psyche may appear random, but we're not really random creatures. So she started practicing regular body scans and other mindfulness techniques. And then after a few weeks, this is the description that I got. The urge really starts in my belly. It's like tiny butterflies that run around, not the good kind. So that means that you have the good kind of butterflies in your stomach, and then you have the bad kind of butterflies in your stomach. Now, the good kind of butterflies is, I think, something most of us feel sometimes. It's like when you really like someone and you're about to see that person, it's some kind of excitement. So right here, she can differentiate between two similar sensations, only one of which will eventually produce the urge to pick. So this is already a point at which she can potentially intervene if it's necessary. So she feels tiny butterflies that run around. Then they move up to my chest, and that's where it becomes tough. So butterflies move from her abdomen up into her chest. And this is like another level of intensity right there. It feels like I can't inhale completely. I take a breath in, and my lungs don't fill up enough. That makes me anxious, so I inhale again and again. And as I do that, my heart starts racing. And usually it's at this point that I start picking. So as you can see, she can't breathe well because she feels all these butterflies, running around her chest. So this kind of sensation. And that makes her lung kind of feel pressed. So she cannot inhale enough. So naturally, if you cannot inhale enough, you will inhale more frequently. It's just like a spontaneous natural response. And then as she does that, as she kind of increases her breathing, naturally, this is very like basic physiology 101, her heart will start racing. So she kind of produces anxiety by the way that she mindlessly responds to a sensation in her chest. We have here at least 2 or 3 other points at which she can now intervene. And then, of course, once her heart starts racing, this is where she will immediately pick. So this is also a place where it's basically the last call to start using competing responses, for example. So once she developed more awareness of what actually happens in her body when she starts feeling the urge, she opened up at least 5 or 6 different places where she can act to actually make the urge go away before it becomes very intense. And if you think about it, just feeling those tiny butterflies that run around, it's like a low key anxiety of some sorts. If I had to define it in more clinical terms, this is already an information. So I didn't put everything because I didn't want to swamp you with text, but this is already, then what I did was ask, okay, so when you were feeling tiny butterflies, let's see what was happening around you. Who were you talking to? Where were you? What were you doing? So that we can see what is it that will cause the tiny butterflies. Because if we can figure out what triggers the tiny butterflies, we prevent the racing heart ultimately down the road and also picking. So our body is a very rich source of information. And you actually use that all the time, every day. How do you know if you're hungry, for example? Or how do you know if you like someone? So you listen to your body. What does it mean, for example, to have a tension headache? You know that headache that's like frontal here, and it's like when it kind of presses you. Usually it's stress. This is one of those things that are maybe not completely universal, but it's something that most of us, I think, share as a reaction. What does it mean when you feel pressure on your chest? This is also a very frequent sensation that people have, and it's incredible how many different meanings it can carry with it. When you feel pressure, so is it from the outside or from the inside? What is it like? Do different kinds of pressure happen in different situations? So right there, you're able to kind of differentiate your stress response very early on. What does it mean when your eyes become teary? Do you ever feel a hole in your abdomen, for example? It's also a sensation that people report. What does that mean to you? I would just, before we proceed, I would just like to return to the first one, the hunger thing. This is something that we don't really give much thought to. We very rarely sit and then think and analyze what's happening in our belly or wherever you will feel hunger. We usually just at one point realize that we're hungry. We get up and we eat. But We also eat when we're sad. We kind of eat when we're anxious. We can also eat when we're lonely. So there's something about how we translate what happens in our body into actions. Even when we are aware of something, it doesn't mean that we're kind of interpreting the information correctly. And I think this is a very important point to make, because hunger is usually something that I think most of you have in your experience, that people stress eat, for example, all the time. And it's not hunger that you're interpreting as I have to eat now. It's something else. So to decipher or to translate what this information mean, you can't really Google it. I guess you can try, but I don't guarantee that it will work. Actually, I'm quite certain that it's not going to. Some of this language really may be shared, like the tension headache example that I gave you, or the butterflies in the stomach. That's a cultural thing. But ultimately, each person's body has its own dialect, if you will, that needs to be understood. So it's kind of like learning a new language, only there's no dictionary to work with, and there is no grammar book that you can, it's like deciphering, I don't know, like deciphering Sumerian or something. Like this, you really have to kind of do trial and error and compare and observe, and then eventually land on a translation. And when you pay attention to what arises in your body and how it passes away, ultimately you will succeed in connecting these things to certain thoughts or to other emotions or to some external events that you may notice. So that way, when you learn how to follow your body, you will ultimately piece together the whole puzzle. It's very important to sort of keep an open mind. I find that when people come to therapy, and not just for skin picking, but virtually for anything, they will sometimes ask questions as if there's like a secret book that psychotherapists have where all these answers are written, and then we just have to look it up. So they will say things like, what does it mean if I feel, I don't know, something like squeezing in my belly? There is really no universal answer. I know it's maybe even discouraging in a sense, but you really have to look inward to figure out what it means. And to make things even more complicated, sometimes one sensation can mean different things in different contexts, kind of like words in an actual language. Here's an example of how one of my clients used the information that her body sort of supplied. I've been checking in with my body as I work, and I began to realize that I start picking when my neck becomes sore. It's like there's additional weight on my shoulders pushing me towards the screen and the keyboard. So she feels soreness in her neck, and then when she observes that sensation, she feels like it kind of adds weight to her shoulders and pushes her forward. I get anxious and uncomfortable, and that's where I start picking. Then I thought about something you say. The body communicates in banal ways. And I thought, what if I counter the force that's pushing me towards the screen? I got up and stretched my arms in whatever this is, and the urge started fading. It's some sort of yoga position. So basically, she noticed the direction in which these sensations are pushing her body, and she decided to create a little more space for her body. So she kind of countered this with let's say, with some sort of stretching, and it dissipated the tension. So what would normally become the urge to pick is a discomfort that she dealt with by just sort of paying attention to these very basic things, like, is it pushing me or pressing me? Is it going, one direction or the other direction? It's like a very basic, even superficial level thinking, I guess. Except that when I say superficial here, I really mean that as a compliment, because this is a really good example of how you don't have to go, deep into some sort of event from your childhood that's terribly painful. You can just see what's happening on the surface, and oftentimes that's quite enough. And when that repeats 3 or 4 times, you will start piecing together the deeper part of the puzzle as well. But you can perfectly take care of yourself even with this level. Here's another example. I find myself not being able to breathe because that's how intense the urge is. My thoughts are all about going to the bathroom, And there's no need to tell you what I would do to my face in front of a mirror alone. My body is burning. There's tension everywhere, and I initially feel repulsed by the thought that I have to jump into that grossness. This is also very common. When you start practicing mindfulness of any kind, we often feel a kind of resistance to it because we really don't want to jump into this kind of trash can that our psyche can sometimes be. But I do, so she jumps in anyway. There's a horror movie going on. So I took out her description because it was quite lengthy, but then what she proceeded to do here is to write down all the sensations that she could notice. I return to my breath, or lack of it, over and over again. It's the main thing. It's short, but also oddly slow. I guess she expected a different breathing pattern. My lungs feel compressed on all sides, pressed. So I decide to uncompress them. I need to shove some air inside. So by following her sensations, she came to the conclusion that basically if her lungs are being pressed on all sides, what she needs to do is kind of reinforce them from the inside to give them, to expand them so that they can get the space that they need. Also very kind of even banal thinking in some way, but very good thinking. 4-7-8 breathing is what I did. So 4-7-8 breathing is a breathing exercise where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then exhale for 8 seconds. In her further explanations, she told me that she chose this particular breathing exercise because I had sent her a kind of a PDF with different types of breathing exercises. And she chose this one because there's a very long pause where you keep the breath in for 7 seconds, or while you count to 7, because she thought that if her lungs need space, then if she keeps them kind of expanded with air inside for a little bit longer, she's going to reinforce the space that her lungs need. So then she chose that instead of something simpler. And then I switched to box breathing, which is another breathing technique, but a little less intense than the first one. In about 4 minutes, I felt all of it passing away. It felt as if the air I'm inhaling is reinforcing my lungs, restoring their strength. Notice how here she really sort of removes the idea of picking and the urge and this whole kind of typical, usual way that we would talk about these things. It's because she focused on the sensations. And then what would normally be this intense amorphous urge, she broke it up into all the sensations that she described to me, and then chose the one that was the most difficult, let's say, to be with or to tolerate. And then she focused on that one and handled that one. But she didn't handle it as an urge to pick. She handled it in this very unusual way, saying, I need to uncompress my lungs. It's almost like in the process of analyzing what's happening in her body, the unity of these sensations, which she would call the urge, kind of disappeared. And what remained is a bunch of different sensations, only one of which was seriously difficult, but all of which combined created what she described as a horror movie. And then she dealt with the main one, and then all of the others sort of dissipated. So the core thing that we do, so a kind of core process in mindfulness is letting go. And I'm sure you've heard that phrase a million times. So when we practice mindfulness formally, at one point we will be distracted because that's just, how our minds work. And then when we figure out that we're distracted, we will let go of those thoughts and then go back to the breath or the body or whatever you're meditating on. When we say letting go, we're not talking about, removing our experiences. We're not talking about banishing anything, expelling anything. What we're talking about actually is letting be. And this is a very important distinction because for some reason, people read books about mindfulness and then decide that if you have a thought and then you let go, the thought is supposed to disappear. These things kind of tend to linger around. What we do is we just let them linger if that's what they want to do. And then we go back to whatever our intention is. So letting be is, I think, a better way to phrase it. The opposite of letting go or letting be is clinging. Clinging means that instead of kind of observing your thoughts or sensations come and go, what you do is you kind of take them and then hug them, and you don't want to let them go. When our experiences are pleasant, we do that routinely. If you feel happy, you don't want the happiness to go. And sometimes, like, the more you cling to these nice and good feelings, you become even frustrated because they inevitably go. All our experience is very transitory. So everything that arises eventually will go away. And if you try to cling to it, you're actually creating a lot of frustration to yourself, because once it starts going away, you're going to try to push it. And you can't do that because you can't control your experience. This would be an example of clinging in the most literal sense of the word. But sometimes when our experience is very unpleasant, we try to push it away. I guess in the most kind of direct meaning of the word clinging, that wouldn't be clinging, but it's the same process where instead of letting your experience unfold, you're trying to interfere somehow, either by kind of hugging the experience or by pushing it away. But either way, when you do any of these, you're giving more power to that experience. Again, emotional avoidance is something that really is a good example for this, because when you avoid intense emotions, they don't necessarily tend to go away. Instead, they accumulate. And then the more you avoid them, the bigger they seem and scarier they seem. So they actually make you feel worse. So in that sense, clinging or pushing away both kind of elevate the unpleasant aspects of our experience. Whereas letting things be is not going to make them pleasant. But then again, life unfortunately doesn't really owe us anything, including being pleasant. So we will still experience a degree of discomfort, but because we're proactive in how we approach our experience, we know that it will go away and we're able to redirect our focus to whatever it is that we want to do. We all have this in our experience, and it sounds super technical when I describe it this way. But for example, you've all had the situation that where you, I know you're sad, but you still have to do something, and then you do something while being sad. Sadness doesn't necessarily interfere with whatever you're doing, but it's present, it's there. So that would be a good example. I think if there are any therapists among you, I think most of us who work as therapists have to learn how to let our emotions be if we really want to be effective at doing our job. Because hearing people's stories that are, of all the stories that people tell us in therapy, they rarely tell us the fun ones. So we get to hear a lot of very difficult and delicate and hard stories to hear. And that naturally causes us to feel all kinds of ways, because even though we are therapists, we're also human, or at least most of us. And then what we have to do is be with that sadness and then still listen and respond to our clients from a professional place. Because if you try to push away your feelings, what will happen is that they will come into the process, but you will not be aware of them, right? So that means that then if you push away your feelings, they come back and they interfere in the process, and you can't even see how they interfere. So being aware is actually a core thing that every therapist kind of has to learn to develop, so that we can balance out and minimize the influence, for example, of our own emotions. So I hope that's clear. But this is a skill that borders on superpower that we develop over time when we practice mindfulness. Letting go of experiences means watching them unfold and understand them in a specific way. It means that we start looking at our experience as just that, experience and nothing more. When I hear people talk, I tend to be, I'm one of those people who look at where they put commas and what adjectives that they choose to use, and how they phrase their sentences and all these things. Sometimes people tell me I'm splitting hairs, but very frequently in these little details, you will discover how they relate to their experiences. So they will say, I'm frustrated, or I'm an angry person, or I'm a failure. All these things are kind of essentializing, whereas you're actually experiencing something very unpleasant. And instead of saying I'm feeling anger, or I'm experiencing discomfort, you turn yourself into a kind of person. So instead of saying I often feel anger, you will say I'm an angry person. And the difference is not just wordplay. The difference is really fundamental, because it shows how you treat yourself as a human being. If you say I'm experiencing, anger, what that means is there's this difficult experience that you should cope with, so you can kind of find a way to deal with it. But if you say I'm an angry person, that kind of cements you as a person that's just destined to be angry. And it also opens up this huge area where you can judge yourself relentlessly and feel guilty, and then add more frustration to that anger, and then judge yourself even more. If instead you approach your experiences as just some stuff that's happening in your body or some thoughts that are coming and going, then you don't have to call yourself, basically bad names. You don't have to judge yourself as this or that. Instead, you can actually be constructive in how you approach these experiences and make sure that you're as comfortable as possible and as safe as possible until they go away. And you can think proactively and think about preventing them and so on. Whereas if you label yourself as a certain kind of a person, well, what can you do? That's just what it is. It's kind of like when people decide that some things are not subject to change because they read an article in, I don't know, Daily Mail about something being genetic. I'm just making stuff up at this point, but I frequently see that where people will say, well, I read this one study that says that skin picking is genetic, therefore I'm probably condemned to struggle with this forever. And when you look close to that one study, you see that it's like 32 patients and they discovered a correlation, which is not the same thing as anything being caused by anything. So, but what you see there is that people will find an interpretation that is going to forever determine them as something. Because that kind of precision gives us certainty, but at the same time, it really kind of opens up a lot of suffering for us. Whereas when you understand things as just experiences, you don't have to be oppressed by them. Being mindful of your body means paying attention to what arises and passes away, but also how you translate what arises and passes away. And this is a key point here. If you remember my example from about 10, 15 minutes ago with food and hunger, how usually people translate the urge is to say, okay, so now I have to pick. The same way that sometimes you just feel something and say, so now I must eat. But if you mindfully examine what it is, you might realize that you're maybe anxious, in which case, I don't know, a relaxation technique or yoga or talking to a friend might be more helpful than eating, for example. So when we're mindful about how we're choosing to translate something. Because we're proactive as well, then we can decide what translation works best for a specific situation. Mindfully observing the urge means seeing it as a set of intense body sensations that arise but that will pass away. And then mindfulness of the body gives us space to consider what a healthy reaction would be rather than an impulsive one, because our initial translation leads to an impulsive reaction. This is usually when you see that you're reacting to something impulsively, this is where you usually interpret this in your experience as that being something you cannot simply resist, almost like a compulsion. Like you see something immediately, you know what to do. And when you're being mindful, you give yourself maybe a degree of freedom between these. So now we're sort of coming into the last part, which is body scans. So what a body scan is, it's very simple. So it's just a structured, formal mindfulness practice where you cultivate body awareness, but in a very particular way, meaning that there is an order in which you will focus on every part of your body, and then you're guided by that sequence so that you cover your entire body, essentially. You check in with every major part of your body. Different teachers will guide these meditations in a different way. I tend to have, let's say, two different types of body scans that I like to do. The basic one would be this figure on the left. And what you see here with all these numbers is the order in which you focus on your body. So I usually like to start with my left foot, or with other people's left foot if I'm guiding a meditation. Then you go up your leg, then the other leg, then the central axis of your body. So your pelvis, your abdomen, your chest. Then you go to your head, and then you go your arms, and then you finish off by kind of tuning into your whole body at once. But if you see this, it's really rather scary, isn't it? because it's hard to imagine that anyone can memorize these numbers and then go and practice mindfulness. And really, it is very difficult. However, when you use guided meditations, and like I said, I will send you two of them, like a short one and a long one. And then when you go through the process, I don't know, dozen times or how many times you need, you will eventually figure out the rhythm yourself. It will become intuitively clear. So no one's expecting you to memorize all this, because that would be truly absurd. And to make things more complicated, if when your focus becomes strong enough, because mindfulness takes time to build, it's like going to the gym. So you can always lift some weight, but to lift really a lot, you need time. So you have to build. So you kind of build stamina with mindfulness also. And that means that in the beginning, you may start with your left foot and then just move on to other parts of your body. But if you're really getting into the details, once you become more advanced, you examine and focus on each finger individually. This is not really very convenient for beginners because it takes a very long time. Just to think, 10 toes, 10 fingers, it's really exhausting. But what I'm saying is you can fine tune your awareness to that degree with obviously regular practice. In the beginning, or for quick, let's say, mindful check-ins during the day, I much prefer this second figure here because it's simpler. So what you basically do is that you focus on the kind of central axis of your body. You start with your feet and then go to your abdomen, your chest, and your head, and then kind of just do the main part. If you're struggling with picking, and you have like restless arms or legs, the fuller body scan might actually be a better way to go. But in the beginning, when you start practicing, I think the simpler one is better to start with, because it's not going to discourage you. It's not going to become too difficult. And mindfulness can really become unbearably intense sometimes. And it's also much easier to remember the steps that you take. So basically, you start with both your feet, and then you move on to your abdomen, your chest, your head. And then I always suggest that when you end by focusing on your entire body. So you connect your feet, you connect your head, and then just kind of turn on the lights everywhere in between, and just stay with that for a while. When you describe sensations, when you do body scans, be as specific and as concrete as possible. There's really no need to reach for any kind of abstract, profound concepts. The simpler you go, the better. So if you're feeling, I don't know, something in your fingers, is it sharp or is it dull? Is it one sensation or several? If it's several, how many? Are they moving or are they static? Are they pulsating or are they stable? What happens to their intensity over time? If you like, you can also try and visualize them in a way as an aid to describing them. But again, we're not visualizing what we would like our body to be, but you're kind of turning into an image what you're feeling. So you're trying to kind of accurately represent what's happening. So now, if you don't mind, I would like to take a few minutes so that we can try a short body scan now, and then we will go to the Q&A.